Morning. Good to see you guys this morning. Welcome to Live at 11. Kevin here. It's Thursday, the 20th of August, and starting to warm up again out there. Hope you guys are all doing well this morning. So glad to spend a couple of minutes with you. Wanted to reveal or to read a situation that happened in Scripture in the Gospel of John that I think will reveal our hearts to us, and that is a really important thing. It's a really good thing to have our own hearts kind of exposed to us, because once we know what's going on in there, we can allow God to do whatever he needs to do. And sometimes we find out that there's amazing stuff going on in our hearts, and sometimes we find out that there's stuff that isn't so amazing and isn't so helpful. And that's what a couple of minor characters, a couple of minor disciples discovered in John chapter 6. And so I'm going to just read it, and it's the story of Jesus feeding the 5,000 here. And so it says this: sometime after this, Jesus crossed the far shore of the Sea of Galilee, that is the Sea of Tiberias, and a great crowd of people followed him because they saw the miraculous signs that he'd performed on the sick. And they didn't have amazing healthcare back then, and so they were following Jesus because they were sick and they had sick people in their lives. Then Jesus went up on a mountainside and he sat down with his disciples, and the Jewish Passover feast was near. And when Jesus looked up and saw a great crowd coming towards him, he said to Philip. Now, we don't get to hear too much about Philip. He's one of the 12, but kind of one of those minor characters, so he only makes a few appearances in the Bible. But Jesus looks at Philip, and he said to Philip, "Where should we buy bread for all of these people to eat?" Right? And so the first question on my mind was, well, why did he zoom in on Philip, right? Why did he ask Philip? Of all the 12 disciples, why did he ask Philip that question? And the reason he did, it seems to me, is because he knew these guys. He knew their hearts. He'd been living with them, traveling with them. He knew their personalities. He knew their strengths. He knew their weaknesses. He knew their fears and their hopes and their dreams. And so Jesus directs this question of, where are we going to get enough bread? Where are we going to get enough dough? Where are we going to get enough money to feed all of these people? And when Jesus asked Philip, where are we going to get enough resource to feed all these people? He could have just as easily been asking Philip, is God present? Is God available? Is God able to do the impossible? Right? This was like a spiritual wellness check. It was like a spiritual pop quiz where Jesus was taking the temperature of Philip's heart and of his faith, right? And so he asks Philip, is there enough here to feed these people? Do we have enough resource? Do we have enough money? And here's Philip's answer. And I love Philip's answer here because it's really true to Philip's heart and to where he was at. And so Philip answered him, 8 months' wages would not be enough to buy bread for each one of these people to have a single bite. 8 months' wages, Jesus, would not be enough for each of these people to get a single bite. And so as these people were coming, and even before Jesus had asked Philip the question about whether or not there was enough, Philip, being Philip, was already doing the calculating, right? He was already looking at the crowds going, I know that we're going to need to feed these people. We're going to have to provide hospitality for them. And so he had already been working on the calculation. So he's like, okay, so there's 5,000 men plus another 3,000 women and children. So let's say we have 8,000 people, and a loaf of bread costs $2. And so he starts calculating that out, carry the one, break it up between all the people. And he comes up with this answer. It would cost tens of thousands of dollars to feed these people. And I'm looking at the money bags and how much money that we have, and I'm calculating it up, and we have $0. Right? So we need tens of thousands of dollars, and we have $0. And so the answer to his calculations to Jesus was, it cannot be done. We are in massive trouble, right? And so often, you guys, we make the same calculations when we look at our circumstances, right? We make the same calculations when we look at the trouble that we're in, whether it's physical trouble, like we're dealing with COVID-19, or we're dealing with cancer, or we're dealing with a bad hip, right? Whether it's an emotional issue that we're struggling with, like depression, or a mental issue like anxiety, or maybe it's a relational issue. We have a bad marriage, we have a bad relationship with our kids. Maybe we don't have any marriage and we wish that we had one, right? Or maybe it's a sin issue that we're dealing with. We're dealing with an addiction, or some area of sin that we just can't seem to get out from underneath, right? And so we look at the issue, and then we start to calculate in the intensity of that issue that is in our lives. How bad is the problem? And then we start to look at how other people have dealt with the problem and what their results were with the same issue. And finally, we look at our own personal resources. We look at how much money is in our pockets. And then we put all of that number crunching together, and we hit the sum button, and out pops an answer. And that is the same answer that Philip got. It's impossible. It is impossible. This marriage cannot be redeemed. I cannot grow. This issue, this physical issue, will never go away. This, this mental issue, I'll always struggle with this. That's the calculation that we do, and that's the answer that we get so often when we look at our own resources and when we look at the intensity of the problems that we're in. Right? But there's another minor character in this story, right? So we've got Philip, the minor disciple, and then in comes another minor character, and this guy's name is Andrew, and we don't get to hear much about Andrew, so pay attention, because he's not everywhere in Scripture like Peter and James and John are. And so Philip says 8 months' wages wouldn't be enough to buy each one a little bite of bread. But then another of his disciples, Andrew, who is Simon Peter's brother, spoke. And it says this. Here he said, here's a boy with 5 small barley loaves and 2 small fish. But how far will they go among so many? So he comes up with a kid who's got just a few things, right? He's just got a couple of loaves of bread and a few fish. He's like, I don't know. I mean, this really isn't going to be able to do much, right? But what I want to show us is that the presence of a mustard seed of faith turns out to be enough. The difference between Philip and Andrew was humongous. It was miles apart. Why? Because Philip had 0 faith. He only was his only calculation was what could happen in the natural. And the difference is that Andrew, he had a tiny bit of faith. He said, this is what we have, and I could give it to you, Jesus, and you could do something with it, but I don't have a lot of faith for it, right? And so Andrew brings the bread and the few fish to Jesus, and he says, how far will this go among so many? But Jesus said, have the people sit down. And there was plenty of grass in that place, and so the men sat down, about 5,000 of them, and Jesus then took the loaves and gave thanks and distributed to those who were seated as much as they wanted. And then he did the same with the fish, kind of amazingly. And when they had all had enough to eat, he said to the disciples, go gather the pieces that are left over, let nothing be wasted. And so they gathered and filled 12 baskets with the pieces of the 5 barley loaves left over by those who had eaten. And the people were absolutely floored, right? And what Jesus wanted to show Philip, the lesson for Philip that day, Philip, who was only able to bust out his calculator, was only able to see in the natural, what he wanted to show Philip was that God can do anything. And when there is faith available, when there's the presence of even the tiniest little bit of faith, God can use that to do the most miraculous things. And so I want to just challenge us in whatever our insurmountable issue is, whatever our greatest challenge is, wherever it is an utter impossibility, that it cannot be done, wherever the cancer is incurable, wherever the relationship is unmendable, wherever the fear or the brokenness or the discouragement or the depression is unbeatable. I want to challenge us to begin with faith, to start. Let our first calculation be in faith, in seeing Jesus first. Because even if we have only a few loaves and a couple of small fish to offer him, if we begin our calculation with Jesus, it opens up the storehouses of heaven. If we begin with God, if we begin with our tiny mustard seed of faith, all of a sudden it changes the entire calculation for us. When we begin with God, suddenly we can have hope. And we will have hope. Suddenly we can have peace. We can have assurance. We can look forward to the breakthrough that we will get. Why? Because we know that the God who fed the 5,000 is the same God who will bring healing to our issue, who will bring breakthrough, who will bring restoration, who will bring peace and hope. Why? Because of God, because of his power, because of his ability. And so Jesus was just discipling Philip in that moment. He was just zooming in on Philip. And I want us in the disciples, if you and I were one of the 12, I want us to be an Andrew, not a Philip. I want us to be one who would say, you know what? You can do just about anything. I've seen you do amazing things. I don't have much to offer, but I have this tiny little bit. I'm going to give you this. And when we give our tiny bit to Jesus in faith, in hope, he will breathe on it and he will do miracles with it. So I hope that's helpful to you. Good to see you guys out there. See you. I see you, Rachel. I see you, Vicky. Nice to see you. Hi, Wendy. Have a great rest of your day, and start with faith, guys. Start with whatever tiny bit of faith you have, and Jesus will multiply it. Jesus will do great things with that little bit of faith that you have. Talk to you later. Bye, everybody.